Hey there, Eurus here, and welcome to Community Life. Here we talk with amazing humans from the community world about their life journeys and learn from each other. Today we have a conversation with Charles Vogl, one of the founding fathers of the community industry as we know it now, a person who influenced my professional journey a ton because of authoring The Art of Community and co-authoring Building Brand Communities with amazing Carrie Melissa Jones, a documentary filmmaker who also produced a New Year baby film that tells the story of his wife's family that survived Cambodian genocide, and also who avoided death at least 3 times, and all of them while pursuing justice for local human rights as a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia in his 20s. So, hello, Charles.
Hello. I just want to understand the introduction. I'm a founding father of the community industry, or did you say field? What noun did you use there?
Yeah, I call it like one of the founding fathers of the community
Okay.
industry as we know it now, at
Okay. Well,
least
you're the
for
first.
me.
I'm not going to argue with you. You're just the first person who's introduced me that way, and you're inspiring me to remember when that book came out. And I was a first time author at the time, and the pandemic had not happened, and the Surgeon General in the United States had not declared a loneliness epidemic in the United States. So that book seemed relatively irrelevant. So I was a new author with a book nobody asked for on a subject nobody was wanting to learn more about. And when people learned I wrote a book about building community, my impression was they assumed I was writing about singing Kumbaya at a beach. And then the world changed. The Surgeon General declared a loneliness epidemic, and we had a pandemic, and now it's ever more relevant. So I'm smiling literally and inside to hear you introduce me that way because this is a surprise.
You've been so ahead of your time because, like your book was the second. Okay, your two books were first books that I've read when I
Mm,
joined the international community industry. So
mm.
for me, you're definitely a founding father.
All
And
right.
you survived a plane crash.
Mm.
So how did you feel when you understood that your plane was going to crash?
Uh, so just for clarity, among pilots, they call it an emergency landing.
Okay.
The plane was damaged and the landing gear was ripped off, and we landed in a place that was not an airport. But I didn't smash to pieces, which is why I'm talking to you now. And it was actually a curiously calm thing. I was in the Peace Corps and I was living in sub-Saharan Africa, and so I'd had a, quite frankly, more adventurous, exciting experience than I wanted to. The plane class included in that list of things that was more exciting than I wanted to be part of. But because of that, the drama of this uh, did not stand out in such sharp relief as it would if it happened today. With that said, I was in a small Cessna 210 with my two parents, my brother, and then the pilot. And the thing about being in that situation is there was a paid professional, in this case, the pilot, working to handle it.
Hmm.
And it was strangely silent because the engine seized, and that's why we needed to make an emergency landing. And so it wasn't like the movies where there was a lot of noises or screaming. It was actually eerily quiet. I was in a plane with no engine running. And the fortunate thing about my family is we are all cool-headed enough that it became clear there was someone working very hard to keep us alive. We all kept our mouths shut and let him do his job with the concentration it needed. And so all of those things combined meant that it was a strangely calm experience. And I remember it was wrong-headed, but I remember as we were coming down, gliding that they call it, it occurred to me that we all might die or we might all be fine. And it never occurred to me that some of us would die,
Hmm.
which I would later learn statistically was what was predictable. What happened is it turns out my mother was mildly injured, but we were never worried that she was mortally injured. And we obviously all lived. So it worked out fine. The part that was scariest was when we were rescued, which took some time. And then we met many pilots that week. We were kind of celebrities in the Zambian private pilot world for a while, for reasons you can imagine. when they would hear about our story and they knew where we were and they knew what altitude and what kind of aircraft and what went wrong, we could tell by the looks on their faces the miracle that we all lived. And when in time someone would explain to us all the dangers that were at hand, then it became more scary because I understood how much peril we were in. But in the meantime, I was just in a quiet plane with a guy working really hard to get the plane down, and it wasn't that exciting.
How did you and your family helped this person?
Well, not distracting him was a big part of it when we were coming down. And then once we had landed, they call it, even though the landing gear, was ripped off the aircraft. First of all, I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer, so I'd been living in the bush for some time and was not afraid of being in the bush, for some days. And the second thing is, seemingly by random, when I knew I was going to go live in sub-Saharan Africa, I had bought at a used bookstore a book on survival. And it was one of those things where I read it largely for entertainment, because who thinks they're going to need these particular skills in a whole book of survival situations? And one, if not chapter, then section, was what to do if you're stranded in a plane crash. And I remember reading it and knowing, well, obviously I'll never be stranded in a plane crash, need these skills. And then there I was. And so quite frankly, I was shocked to know I knew what to do. And so one thing to do is you want to build a fire, because when people are looking for you in the bush, obviously finding little specks is hard. So a fire is better. And then a triangle fire is the universal sign of emergency. So you set up one fire burning, and then you set up two fires ready to go. And then for nighttime, and that way, when you hear a search aircraft, you run embers from the main fire to the setup fires. And now you have a triangle. In the daytime, you set up a fire and you get green branches ready to put on the fire. So when you hear rescue aircraft, you can create smoke. And I need to do that. And that's exactly what we did. And we did some other things too, but our lives were never in danger given the duration we were out there. Anyway, so when the search party found us, and then they had to land far away because there was no landing area near us, and they had to hike in. When they finally got to us, I remember the first words of the lead bush guide was, "Your survival skills are remarkable." And that was simply a matter that I had almost by accident read a chapter on surviving a plane crash.
Maybe it was not an accident,
Maybe. But I promise you, when I read that chapter, I was not thinking, oh, better log these skills away.
You never know what to read these days. Sometimes when people are getting into a car accident, they kind of afraid of driving after that. So were you afraid of flying after that?
That's a good question. I wasn't afraid of flying exactly. And remember, we were largely unhurt. My mom was hurt, but she fully recovered. But this funny thing has happened since. Before that incident, whenever I would hit turbulence in aircraft, it meant nothing. Right, it's just going to pass. Even to this day, and it's been decades since, when we get that kind of zero gravity falling of the turbulence, my body is not okay with it. And I know that it's because I've been on an aircraft where we got light and it didn't come back up. We were, we were descending. And so there's still, if you will, that body memory that being aircraft and going weightless is not all safe.
So let's start from the beginning. Tell me about your parents. Who are they?
My parents live in Southern California. My mom is my mom is Chinese American, and she grew up in Hawaii. And my father was what we call military, with the United States we call a military brat. So he lived many, many places. And my parents met in California. And so by virtue of that, my last name is Austrian. My father, my surname is Austrian from my father's heritage. And then my mother was Marcia Chang. So I'm a biracial Asian American. And I was born in the 1970s. And for people in the United States, that the United States was involved in wars in Southeast Asia in the 1970s. And I grew up in Southern California, which is the West Coast, of course, California, the side of Asia. So I grew up in a biracial family in California in a time where when people met biracial Asian kids, they assumed some percentage of people assumed we were accidental war babies. And I'm not. But that experience like taught me how just meeting someone, there's so many judgments jump into the conversation, if you will, and no matter how little people understand. And that's one reason I still find it curious. People say, I don't see race. I'm like, really? Because my entire life, people have been judging me and my history and why I'm here and how I got here just by looking at me. So I don't believe
That's how it works.
there's
Exactly.
an
That's
entire
like,
generation of Americans who don't see race.
yeah. You told that both of your parents and you are cold-headed. So
Or what headed?
cold, like having like cold mind. Yes, like if you are not stressing out in extreme situations, as far as I understood correctly.
Oh, calm. Yeah, we cool headed. Okay, yeah.
Cool-headed. Okay, cool-headed.
Yeah.
And have you ever seen them fighting?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, they've been married a long time.
How it works when you have two cool-headed people fighting?
Well, we're not cool headed all the time, certainly including me. But in that particular, I think I haven't lived through a lot of emergencies with my parents and brother, but um, they're just not people who naturally freak out. I don't know if the thinking has moved on, but at one point when I was doing emergency response training, I was told at the time there people generally respond three ways to emergencies. One is to freak out, and usually create a distraction. Another one is to freeze up, where they can't think, can't make decisions. And another one is to take action. The action may be the wrong action. It may be uninformed action, but they'll take action. And that's important to know when we come across an emergency situation, be a car accident or someone has a heart attack, because we'll be confused why some people are just seemingly standing around. And it's not that they're terrible people who don't want to help. It's their bodies reacting by freezing up. And some people create real distractions. And we think, it would be really great if you helped or helped to let us focus instead of, say, distracting the pilot. And it's not that they want to distract the pilot. It's just that their body's freaking out. And in that particular example, nobody freaked out. And that allowed our pilot to do his job.
Still, how are your parents fighting? Or how did they fight?
Oh, I'm sure they don't want me talking about things that happened in our home 40 years ago. Without,
Got it.
but anybody who's been in a long-term relationship, and I know you've been with your wife for more than 10 years.
I know
We
how
all
it
have to
works.
work out
I
how
know
conflict happens.
if it's like
especially when
that,
we
I know
can't
how it works.
walk out of the
Okay.
house and never come back. And it's not all pretty, which is why we do it behind closed doors, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let's move to yourself.
Yeah.
From what age do you remember yourself?
You mean what's my earliest memory?
Yeah.
I remember being in a crib. It's not a very sophisticated memory, but I remember being in a crib. So whatever that was, sub 2 years old, sub 1 years old.
What is the first memory of your childhood that comes to your mind right now?
Well, one of the prominent memories, which I'm surprised I still remember, I was 18 years old when my brother was adopted into our family, 18 months old. And I remember my parents getting the phone call announcing his arrival at the hospital and really the beginning of his life with us. And I was, it's easy to mark the calendar. I was 18 months old. And it was probably mattered that there was a lot of emotion in the house because they were expecting another son. And then the call came. But I remember that.
Do you remember how did you feel when you heard this announcement?
No, and of course, at 18 months, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew there was excitement. It was excitement. It was excitement, not panic, right?
What kind of brother are you?
Well, one of the things that I've really admired about my relationship with my two siblings, now that we're all, definitely adults, is we all have a very high integrity relationship with one another. I don't live near them, and by virtue of that, don't see them very often. We do see each other at holidays, and I saw them this summer for a birthday. But one of the things that is true, no matter how often we talk or visit, is we respond to one another timely. And when there is a request for help, be it casual or more serious, I know that we all commit within our bandwidth, and I can depend on them to follow up with whatever they say, whether that's to travel to my wedding, whether that's to, plan some event, arrange gifts, that they're just dependable. I say just dependable, which is like ridiculous because, as you know, Yuri, you've run long enough to know that not everybody's dependable. Not everybody says they're going to do something, does it, or does it on time, or does it at a quality level that is consistent with the reason we asked them to do something. And to have siblings that I trust will be responsive, follow up, and do so with integrity is a big deal. And I deeply appreciate that about the relationship amongst the three of us.
Tell me one story about you and your siblings together.
Oh, so when we were shooting the film New Year Baby, for those who don't know, that's a documentary film about my now wife's family escaping the Cambodian genocide and becoming American. And we had never made a full-length film before. My wife had worked for NBC News, but not as a director. I had studied film in undergrad, but I'd never made a film. So we were largely making it as we go, well-informed by professionals, but we didn't have jobs. And whenever one's making a documentary film, especially about genocide survivors, there was never enough money to hire the things we needed to make the quality film we wanted to make. And the film was funded at a great level by PBS and would eventually go on to air internationally. So it needed to be at an international, professional, quite frankly, award-winning level. But I didn't have enough money to hire the animator and hire that DP and hire that, crane. And during that production, I needed help. And my brother is amongst the best graphic artists I know. And I turned to him a lot. And he would never take money, not that I could have afforded his full fee anyway, and created beautiful work. So it looked like we could afford brilliant professional graphic artists. And then we did a shoot on a beach with a number of Cambodian Americans, children of survivors. And it was a long shoot, hours on the beach. And we couldn't afford catering. And I asked my sister to help with that. And we gave her a grocery budget. But there's no enormous amount of work there, not to mention her own time showing up. And I just remember being so touched that their older brother was making this project. And they had no evidence that it was good, right? Because I never made one before. And they knew there was no money involved. Like I wasn't promising money ever, much less, now. And it was a long project. So it wasn't like, hey, quick, help me out, and then it's done, right? It's this big, long project. And they both came forward and stepped up with the absolute professionalism and professional skills they had, and were a resource I could never afford. And I just remember being touched that I had family that would do that and do that so powerfully, and have told them so.
What was the hardest part emotionally for you personally while making a New Year Baby film?
Oh, it was a long process. I think we made the film for 2 years, and then it was on the film festival circuit for 2 years. And I don't have a trust fund that I could just dip into and pay for it. So we had to fundraise, which meant learning to fundraise. And the hardest part was that films like this are very time sensitive, in that if you can't go do the shoot, it was documentary film, right? So these are real people, not fictional people. If you can't go do the shoot to interview those people or go to those sites, you may never get access again. And then when we hired people, like we were hiring people who were very qualified and had very successful professional lives, they'll agree to do the project. But then if you don't have the money to pay them whatever you've agreed to, and they stop working for you because you don't pay them, then they go get another project and they're booked up for another year and a half. And like, you can't start up easily or maybe at all. And what it means is, as a producer, I had to fundraise as fast as I like to put it, as the cell phone bill. And I was not very good at it in my own mind. And it was very challenging, and there was no end to it, right? It's not like you'd say, well, by Thursday we'll be done, or if we just do 2 more weeks. And it became emotionally exhaustive. And part of finding enough funders for the kind of work we were doing is to meet people I didn't know
Hmm.
who shared the values that were inspiring the project, and then them to become comfortable enough with me such that they understood that, yes, we shared values, and yes, this is a worthy project, and yes, I can trust you with it. And here's like a real amount of money. And inevitably, there's people I don't yet know, which is, why they're not supporting yet. And when that goes on for 7 years, it's an emotionally exhausting experience. And at some point, it also feels like I was just dancing,
Hmm.
because people who were supportive and were friends would invite me to meet their friends, be that in Martha's Vineyard or on the Upper East Side of New York, or, wherever we're going, Los Angeles, Phnom Penh. And I needed to meet these people and make a good impression, right? And that was appropriate, and I was good at it, and it was all authentic and honest. At some point, there's a lot of it, and it feels like dancing. It feels like I'm coming to your Martha's Vineyard friends group to dance as the genocide PBS filmmaker so that you'll like me. And there's more than 5 minutes of reflecting, are we doing the right thing? Are we being honest about it? And anybody who's fundraising will tell you, there's a lot more no's, there's a lot more indifference than there is excitement. And that's all well and good to say, but when it lasts for years, we really have to dig deep in emotional resilience to keep on going. And that was really hard. And I still believe it's much harder to fundraise to make an international award-winning film than to make an international award-winning film. People think it's like the fundraising thing you do, then you make the film. It's like, no. The filmmaking part is easy relative to the fundraising part.
Talking about real dancing, how do you feel about dancing?
I'm not a dancer. Yeah, there you go. It's just one of those things that my body doesn't call me to do, and certainly when I do it, nobody thinks I'm good at it. So there you go. There's not much more to say about that.
How did you meet your wife?
So I'm trying to sum this up. I had returned from the Peace Corps with acute malaria, and was so sick I was hospitalized. And then at some point, they had killed the parasites enough that I no longer had to be in the hospital. And after hitchhiking across Africa and living with acute malaria, I went to Italy to visit my then aunt and uncle living in Florence, where things were not nearly as rough as they were in sub-Saharan Africa, where I was Peace Corps volunteer. And at one point, I got in line to a tourist attraction in Florence. And when I got to the top of this tourist attraction that I'd waited an hour and a half in, a young woman approached me and said, "Will you take my photograph?" And she would later admit that she had seen me in line an hour and a half earlier and wanted to meet me and approach and say for. And that woman is my now wife, Sachita. And so because of that, I actually met my wife in the cupola of Brunelleschi's dome in Florence.
So what happened after you took a photo?
Well, I was traveling alone, and so was she. She was on spring break from her undergrad studies. And she's obviously American, so spoke English beautifully. And so I invited her to go to see the Medici tombs, which was next on my checklist of stuff to see in Florence. I believe they were closed that day for some reason. So what we ended up doing is she got a panini in a piazza, and we started chatting, and that obviously went well. And I was going to have dinner that night with my uncle and aunt who lived in a villa in Florence and had since the 1950s. And so I knew they'd like meeting her, this young, smart American traveling by herself in Florence. So I invited her to dinner with my uncle and aunt. And that was our first dinner together.
If I'm calculating correctly, you already spent with your wife almost like a half of your life. So how does it feel?
Yeah, we've been together 23 years, and I turned 50 this year. So about half, yeah.
How does it feel to know a person outside of your family, like outside of your relatives, for almost half of your life?
We have a great relationship now. It's like all good marriages. There are times and down times. And we've lived, golly, at least 5 chapters. We lived the chapter of our life in New York, then our chapter of life in Connecticut, then a chapter of our life in California. And then even when we were in New York, there's a chapter when she was working for Network News in New York, doing that New York media lifestyle. And then the chapter when we were independent filmmakers. And then when the film came out, literally flying around the world as PBS American filmmakers. And so, golly, even though it's been 23 years, it's been so full of adventure. And this really almost embarrassingly amazing thing happened. So at one point, the film had come out and had done well and won some awards, and by virtue of that, gained invitations around the world. And then I had gone to grad school to study religion, philosophy, and ethics. And then because of the success of her work, she was appointed a fellow at the university in the Genocide Studies department. And so when people met us, we were these PBS filmmakers studying religion and leading an international project. And it led to a lot of invitations to conferences and just social events and whatnot. I've subsequently learned that it's because people who often have money often want to meet more interesting people than the people in their field, i.e. they don't want to go to parties of all lawyers or all finance people. And so they need to find people who are not lawyers or finance people to invite. And that may explain why we got so many invitations. But what I'm getting at is, so we had this chapter of our lives where we didn't have any money. In fact, I was going into debt every day in grad school, but we were invited to really wonderful places with people who wanted us to be around and were very generous with us. Like we actually spent a lot of time in Martha's Vineyard because we had friends who would invite us there. And as grad students going into debt every day, the least expensive vacation we could go on was to stay in someone's guest room in Martha's Vineyard. I understand the irony of that. So here we were on our cheapest vacation in the guest room Martha's Vineyard, in a place that's famous for its ridiculous wealth and privilege. But what I'm getting at is we lived this adventurous lifestyle, just meeting people and learning about fields and projects and adventures of things we weren't involved in. And it's been an absolute thrill of an experience. And even now in my life, my work has been really embraced by certain parts of the military and a great deal of educational institutions in this country. And so I'm not in education and I haven't served in the military, but I've met so many wonderful, committed people working in both of those fields, doing terribly important work. And my wife has been on the journey with me, and we didn't predict any of it.
What does it mean for you to have a good marriage?
Oh man, that's a long conversation. I think people write PhDs on very narrow bands of that, Yuri. I think we have a good marriage because we respect one another. And we're both creating lives that we both aspire to and are meaningful. And there's no ceiling on it. We've changed location, we've changed fields so much, and it just seems to keep growing. And that sounds successful. I'm not holding her back. She's supporting me and doing my thing, and we have fun doing it.
Who's your 3 a.m. call friend?
So Yuri, I have an embarrassing, I don't even have a noun. I want to say collection or bundle, or I'll tell you this number. So I think Yuri, that I have a birthday tradition where I write down during the day what's happened last year in my life, just so there's a document that I'll have, and if my son wants to read it someday, he'll have it. And what that activity does is it forces me, in a good way, to reflect, well, who's in my life? Because I've done all these things. Who was doing it with me? And on a separate document, it's a spreadsheet, I write those names down, because those are the people who made a difference. As I say it, they made a difference in my life. Well, I turned 50 this year, and this year that names list was 178. And I know that you're educated enough, Yuri, that you know that 178 is larger than the Dunbar number. And it's the first time that I hit a number so high, although it's obviously been high other years as well. We didn't get to 178 overnight. And seeing that gave me pause, because I'm aware that these are all people that I know on a first name basis, and I can name explicitly how they made a difference in my life in the last year. Not like, oh, you're so great, you're the best, I just love knowing you, it's just wonderful having you in my life. Not that stuff. Like, no, right? Like, Yuri, you invited me on your media podcast to share my story and any wisdom I can offer to help the people who trust you. And if I don't have people in my life who trust me to share what I have to say, then it's just me declaring myself brilliant in a self-aggrandizing way. So you made a difference, right? Very specific. And so it was really powerful to notice I have more than the my number of people that I can call by name who are making a difference. And that's just wonderful. And so as you can imagine, some percentage of that are 3M friends, and it's a healthy number. And the second thing that came up when I looked at that number for me was it also explained why I have this feeling like I don't have enough time to stay as connected with people I want to stay connected with. I don't mean like my network. I mean people who are actually important to me, and our friends are supportive and responsive. And because the math doesn't work, right? If there's 178, there's only 52 weeks a year, and some of those are Christmas and Easter, the math gets kind of squirrely. So when someone like you reached out to me and it takes us weeks to get a call, it's like, oh, that's why. It's not that I'm a snob and a jerk and I think I'm too important. It's because the math doesn't work.
So almost 180 people who influenced your life during the year. It means like at least
not influenced, that I
you
know on a first
influenced.
name basis that I can name how they made a difference for me in the last year.
Yeah, I
The
mean like
influence number would be way bigger, right?
so they made a difference, and it means like it's like one person in 2 days made a difference for you during the year.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
what does it mean for you to make a difference?
That I recognize that they somehow contributed to my life in a way that I appreciate. And an example is people who invite me into their home to share a meal. Obviously, you're living this unfortunate displaced lifestyle outside of Ukraine because of war. With that said, like, I don't know how many people invite you to their home, sit down for a meal per year.
0.0.
0.0. So not that many.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, it's above 0, but it's not 50, right? It's not even 25. So to those people who did, first of all, that's special. Second of all, I'm aware that if I live a life where I don't have friends who invite me over to share a meal, my life is probably pretty yucky, right? Whether they do it in their home, not everybody has a home they can bring people in, right? Especially if you have roommates or, there's other stuff going on, sick relatives at home or something. No, so when someone invites me over to share a meal, like, that's special, and I can just write it off or whatnot, or recognize, no. Yuri invited me over for dinner exactly one time. The fact that there are Yuris in my life that invite me to share a meal in their home is one of the things that makes my life special. And because you did that, we spent that time, I built a friendship that doesn't happen over Zoom, right? Or doesn't happen over chat.
Yeah.
That actually is what creates the friendships that make my life rich and powerful. That's a big deal. And I can name that. And it's not hyperbolic or aggrandized. It's just the truth. It's a big deal. I'll give you an example. I have a friend. His name is Dr. KG. I've known him since he was 20 years old. He's now a 50-something-year-old man. And one of his roles is that I can call him or his wife, Betsy, now also a friend, any hour, any day, for any medical concern whatsoever. And we are close enough friends that I know that if he finds out that at 2 a.m. my son woke up with a thing and I was scared and I don't call him, that's a problem for him. He's a 3M friend. And we have, over the last 30 years, called him a number of times, and some of them was, should I go to the emergency room? Because I don't want to make this drag. And sometimes the answer turned out to be yes. Go to the emergency room right now. So I don't call Cage every year with the question, should this family member go to emergency room right now? The fact that as I'm talking to you, Yuri, there is no less than one doctor friend who said, you better call me if you have a medical question, makes a difference for my family. Right?
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And
Yeah.
I wish everybody at 178 people, Yuri, on their list. And can you imagine how amazing the world would be if everybody you and I know, particularly in Ukraine, was aware that if any problem comes up, there's no less than 50 people who want the phone call. We'd all be
Yeah.
calmer. We'd all be safer. Because we're calmer and safer, we could treat each other with more respect, right? Less defensively, more generously. Because I'm not going to run out because I got 50 people I can call and they're going to help me out if I run out. So if Yuri needs it, make sure
Yeah.
Yuri gets it, whatever it is. I wish that for everybody. And in many ways, my work is about pointing others to the ancient wisdom. I invented none of this. The ancient wisdom which creates that. Because I'm not doing anything innovative. I'm just using long-standing wisdom people have been using for thousands of years. And it's, as you can tell, radically changed my life.
Sounds like a great community.
My life is amazing.
So I have a question from Carrie. What community was like for you as a young child?
Oh, well, there's the irony, right? We teach you we have to learn. And the reason I think I have the skills and can name what I'm doing and what's important so well is I didn't know it intuitively. And, the truth of the matter is I grew up a half Asian American kid in the 1980s in America. And I don't know how much American media you watch, but you cannot find 5 examples of an English-speaking Asian man in American media before 2005 that isn't good at martial arts or a nerd waiting for a white man to tell him what to do. I know you can't name 5. In fact, I'd be surprised if you could name 3, but we're going to be generous and say 5. So to grow up in a culture that holds that kind of ideology for Asian men, right? You're emasculated. You're good for technical skills to help white men do what they're going to do that's bold and brave. And if you have any value, it's because you can fight because you've trained martial arts. Is not a welcome mat for generous inclusion in the culture. And indeed, I'm now 50. I know many professional Asian men now, and all of them, talk about this. And there was exactly one exemption. My friend Newton, he said, no, I didn't. That wasn't a challenge for me. And then one of the funny things that's happened is just in the last 5 years, something's changed in his life, and he realizes how much of his life has been influenced by being othered as in his case, a Chinese American man. So, which is to say, it wasn't natural integration. In fact, it was, I don't think extreme othering, but it was very clear where it went like, oh, you don't really belong here. And, the other thing that was true was, I'm trying to sum up some ideas without drawing on. I'm more drawn to more contemplative relationship to accomplishment of the world or growing than the mainstream American culture would lead us to believe. And you've said that my work has influenced you for some years now, maybe even inspired some of your work. And you've noticed how little I post on LinkedIn or anywhere else.
Close to zero, I would say.
Close to zero. That's right. And I'm getting criticism for that. And people in my team are encouraging me to change that. But as of this recording, it's not zero, but it's asymptotical to zero. My good friend Danielle, who's a community expert, she called me the community hermit. And she is aware, because she's a friend, that if you know me, you know what I'm doing, working with military people and educators. And I've got a book coming out in March. But if you don't know me, you don't know. And this is all to say that I relate to the world in a more quiet thinking way than a world that says you should be out there doing stuff, accomplishing it, and bragging about it. And I don't do that. And that, has led to its own way of relating to the world and to, colleagues that's just different than that. So I didn't feel like I connected.
Mm.
And that was true in the Peace Corps, for example, where a lot of Peace Corps volunteers embraced being in the Peace Corps as an opportunity to drink heavily because they didn't have to be in school or go to work the next day, or I guess look like an adult, to other Americans. And getting high and getting drunk was a huge part of the Peace Corps church. And then when Peace Corps volunteers gathered, that was largely the activity, getting really high and drunk. And, God bless them if that works for them. I had no interest in that. So, like, where did I fit in? Right. And then there's the whole thing that when I was in Peace Corps, was 85% white. And that 15% that wasn't white was like everybody wasn't white.
Mm.
And the Peace Corps was largely, if not entirely, suburban kids with college educations and so little debt that they didn't need to worry about the debt such that they could go serve in the Peace Corps, which is to say privileged kids. And so white privileged kids together drinking was the culture of the Peace Corps when I was in it. And guess what? I didn't fit in that.
Yeah.
So all of these skills I had to learn either from naturally studying the spiritual traditions I have, which have brought people together for literally thousands of years, and then mentors who have taught me step by step. And I would say that I really started learning what I was doing and what worked when I got back from Peace Corps at 27. And that's when a mentor of mine named Ed Zogby, who was it's not Franciscan, it's escaping me now, the tradition. And I was an activist. I was working on human rights in sub-Saharan Africa. I worked in homelessness before that. And then when I got back to the United States, I was working on the genocide education and healing work. And it was Ed Zogby who said explicitly, Charles, you need to learn how to bring people together around shared values and purpose. Because when you do that, you're going to build a community of people who can make a difference instead of you becoming exhausted trying to doing everything. And that's when the articulation of this, what was important to do and how to do it, started coalescing. So,
What was the best
question, Yuri?
I feel like we can talk about it, like exactly as about what is a good marriage. So I feel like it's just the beginning of conversation, but yeah, at least you covered a part for me to understand.
Mhm.
And tell me, what was the best loaf of bread you've ever made?
That I've ever made?
Yeah.
So one of the things about me is, from what I can tell, I can do nothing in moderation. And in one point, amongst a series of culinary challenges I've taken on with no moderation, I took on sourdough. And just to let you know how that finished, at some point I had to give away all of my sourdough gear to get my life back, because anybody who's taken on sourdough knows it takes over your life and it becomes a mistress. And you care about her temperature and if she's getting enough water and if someone's needed her. And I had to give it away. But in that chapter, I really took on sourdough. And I got to a point where I'd given, when those of us who make sourdough, we make more bread than we can eat, which means you're giving your friends bread because someone's got to eat this bread you're making. And I gave my friend Courtney a loaf of bread, and she was a gymnast at the time. And she apparently took this loaf, this miche, on a bus with other gymnasts. And they all assumed, the other gymnasts assumed this bread was from the best bakery in the city we were living in at the time. And so I took that as the signal that I had finally made bread good enough that I could let go of the sourdough. Was it the best bread in America? No, but it was confused with the best professional bakery in town. Good enough. And so sourdough miche is the answer.
Well, how long did you prepare to make the best piece of bread?
Oh, I don't know. Months at least. Maybe it was over a year. It was years ago, over 10 years ago. And over the years, I've taken on apple pie, lasagna, pizza, fried rice, mala dry pot, long list of stuff. Burmese tea leaf salad. And I just make and make and make and make like a man who doesn't know any boundaries until it's as good as it needs to be.
So you were working with Google thought leaders and also you
Mhm,
work with military veterans. So what
mhm.
are the human differences between those people?
What are the differences?
Human differences.
What are the human differences? Well, they're very, very different cultures. Um, I'm trying to think what I can say about Google. It's uh, not that they would care, but um, I don't think I'm breaking any confidence or any problems when I say that Google is a company founded by engineers, full of engineers. And I gave a workshop there, and I was surprised in relative terms how little emotion was expressed in the room. Because usually when I'm giving workshops, a lot of emotion comes up. So we're talking about loneliness and friendship and deep connections that matter. And you can't talk about that for hours in a row, I think, effectively without a lot of emotion coming up.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Yuri, if you spend 6 hours talking about deep relationships that matter to you, like some emotions are going to come up, right?
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully. And I was really surprised. It was nothing, but it was like the absolute least expressive I'd ever led. And I've led from, New York to Bangkok at this point. And one of the executives explained to me that this is a company that really encourages like thinking and ration
Hmm.
and not emotional expression, even if it's there. And that's just the culture. And so when I show up, I'm walking into that culture. And that's still unique. That's not to say there's no emotion, they don't have emotion. It's just they're not
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of ready to share it, in the experience. And then with the veterans I have spent time with, I am deeply moved by, I have never articulated this before, the commitment that is clearly present, that's underneath their reason for being there, for being with each other, the deep care they have for one another, and the deep empathy they have for one another that I know that I don't have and don't have access to. I've never
Hmm.
lived through that stuff. And I never lived through the challenges that come after you live through that stuff. And I don't pretend that I can empathize. I can just respect it and honor it. But they have the gentlemen I speak to have just deep respect and deep honor. And part of that is a compassion for bad behavior,
Hmm.
uh, behavior that is 100% agreeable, not healthy. But there's a compassion there that I think comes from empathy that I don't see elsewhere. I'm sure it's elsewhere, but I don't see it because it's really, 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 really hard. And there's a lot of pain because U.S. has been at war for over a generation, and in a lot of places, and it's left deep wounds, not only in the men and women who have gone so-called downrange, as they use the term with me, but then their families who then are impacted by that as well. You're closer to this than we want anybody
Hmm.
else to be close to it, and it's going to be a part of your culture for no less than 2 generations. So,
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything you're unfamiliar with. I'm just sharing that I've been confronted by that, and it's tough by every standard.
And compassion for bad behavior. What does it mean? What does it look like?
Well, one of the reasons why there's so much investment in veteran health is the drinking, the violence, the domestic violence, the broken families. It's really hard, and there's statistics on this. I don't have them on hand, but it's hard. And I think for someone who doesn't have the compassion, like guys, and they're very often guys who treat their spouses that way, or use guns that way, or use alcohol that way. It's like, whoa, just get away from them, right?
No.
But these guys have an empathy that is well informed, and I can recognize it and respect it.
Are you getting emotional when talking to
Do I get
veterans?
emotional with them? Absolutely. Um, there's a lot of things I can't talk about with that
Mhm.
work, so I'm trying to think what I can talk about. Um, there are guys that I spent time with that I genuinely developed. I didn't walk in with it. A level of awe and respect when I understood the scale, the import, and the sheer challenge of what they did and continue to do. I'm trying to think what I can say. You know, I met some guys whose job was, and some guys whose job may still be, to show up when Americans are in danger,
Mhm.
and to be the proverbial rescuers, and to spend time with the guys who have trained for, volunteered for, and are ready to right this minute to go where other people run away,
Mhm.
and to do all the things that they need to do to be as prepared as a man can be to go where other people are running away. It's deeply moving. And you know, I hitchhiked across Africa for years as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer. And one of the things I've come to learn, let me say it differently. One of the things that I have a very clear respect for is I've hitchhiked across no less than 3 African countries for weeks, months, maybe cumulatively. And I have no story about being shot or beaten, even though I was by myself with a day pack. And, you know, the Africans who saw me assumed I had more wealth on me than maybe they had in the world because I was American and hitchhiking. I don't have a single story about getting beaten for my bag. And it's in part because other men, and they are men, did things that in the places I was hitchhiking, they were afraid to attack an American without good
Hmm.
cause. And there are more crude ways to describe that I've heard guys in the military talk about that. And that's not to defend all things military does or say that everything is done should be honored. Whatever else is true, I have fantastic adventurous stories of Charles hitchhiking across African countries. And that was at least in part made possible by men who chose very, very different jobs. And
Yeah.
if somebody had kidnapped me, I don't know who would have come or when they've come or if it's possible to come. But there are men who volunteered to train and, quite frankly, beat up their bodies in the process to be ready to come get me. And the threat of them coming to get me is
Mm.
enough to dissuade a lot of people who would otherwise make a go of it. And so I have developed a level of awe of their commitment and availability that I didn't have before I understood the totality of what they were doing.
What are your relationships with God?
With God, that's a big, you don't have a degree in this, right? So you just want to see how trite what kind of trite answers you can get out of me in short. So my work is from my perspective about ministerial healing.
Hmm.
And that is not necessarily denominationally specific or even cosmologically specific. It is a commitment of healing. And even though my book is named Building Brand Communities, for those of you who actually read it, and you are one of them, you see that in the very beginning, I say this is not a book on how to extract more and better from other people. This is a book how to connect people around shared values and purpose to make a difference for others and to strengthen, create more resilience, and heal the people you're working with, which is to say it's ministerial. So my work is deeply connected to what I think is important given a relationship to a grounding of being that is neither material nor knowable. And then how we relate to God, varies radically, and it's changed radically in my own lifetime. But it's a terribly important relationship and is a through line that informs all of my work. And in fact, so much so, I'm having a hard time framing my work that is adequately relevant to corporate leaders who are simply looking for ways to maximally extract.
Mm. Yeah.
And, before we started recording, you just shared some people you've been connected with. I have a real difficulty with people who say they're community builders and say they're building community. And I recognize that all of their work is framed to teach people how to extract more from others.
Mm.
because in my life, that's not community. And
No.
even if we call it community, and I'm not going to call it, but even if we did, you're a guy living in another country, while I don't even know what the noun is, tribe, generation, people, are going through a defining time in your history. I already know how many communities you want to be a part of next year where their intention is to extract more from you. I already know.
Nobody knows.
So since Yuri doesn't need to join a community that's extracting from him, why would I want to spend an hour of my life teaching people how to build communities, air quotes, that are extractive?
Yeah.
It's not what the world needs. And so if someone's looking for that, first of all, I'm not the thought leader for them. But second of all, I have a real hard time with the people you're finding who are speaking to that. Because I think that's building the toxicity that's created this lonely era such that you and I are interested in this, Yuri, because we have to be, because it's not natural. It's not natural enough wisdom out there that this conversation is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I have a real problem with those people. And I think they're bad for our generation. And I won't name names, but I think you know who I'm talking about.
I feel like there are many people, bad people in different industries. And the fun thing that I ran the community for sales experts. And there were sales experts who were like, no matter what, I just need to sell, like whatever. But really great sales experts, they helped people. Yes, they sold their products, but they went through deep understanding what is the problem, how people struggle, what are the other ways they tried, any other ways they tried that can help them. If not, here is a product that can help you, that can really help you.
Sure.
And when people purchase, it feels like pretty much in the community. So you can do community for extracting, but you can really genuinely help people and they will just give you back. So it's a huge difference. And I totally get what you're talking about. And, I feel like it's a whole another part of a conversation. And I really wish to have the sky as a limit to the conversation, but time is a limit. And I have this guest's question.
Wait, before we continue, since you're obviously doing this podcast and you have an audience at some level, I hope you join me in calling out the difference between what we're interested in, which is bringing people together in ways that make them more resilient, healthy, and stronger, and what other people call community building, which is about manipulating and extraction. Because we need as many of us calling that out so that people who are looking for the skills to address the pain of our time are not distracted by the people who are offering toxic wisdom.
I feel like I have a built-in filter for such people. I can tell the difference. Like I just feel it. I just don't know how to explain it to others. And one of the things that I'm trying to do personally, so I'm trying to share with people I know and people who I'm connected on LinkedIn and in any other ways, I'm trying to share it as much as possible, my human approach to build into a community. And I feel like, when I got my kid, I thought it would be easy because I would just tell them what to do and he will do what I told him.
Oh, sure.
But it doesn't work that way. You have to lead by
Ever.
example. And I feel like the best way to really tell people on how to do this properly is to lead by example. And it's something that I'm trying to do. I see many, many people who are also doing the same. And I'm really, even though it's social media, yes, LinkedIn, it's social media platform, still, I see so many amazing people who are doing this in the right way. And I feel like we are getting there,
Good. Well, I mean, you give me some hope that the work that I wrote some years ago has been influential on you. And I know that
first of all, and I know many, many other people who are also influenced by your work. So on behalf of them, thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And let's be honest about here, people who haven't read the book and don't know me. Like, I don't think I invented that stuff. And I'm hopefully I'm crystal clear in the book, I hope. that I didn't invent that. I was just distilling, articulating it.
And
So
unities were for hundreds of
that's right.
ages, for thousands of
Thousands of years.
ages.
So I am
Exactly.
delighted that, my work helped you reconnect with wisdom that's way older than the two of us, so you can make the difference in this time. It's super delightful for me.
And yes, Charles, as I told, I wish to have the sky as a limit, but time is a limit. And
Cool.
let's jump to the rapid fire questions.
Okay, rapid fire
So,
question.
write a book or read a book?
Oh, I don't even know how to answer that. I do both.
Preparation or execution?
I also know how to answer that. If you don't prepare, then your execution is going to be cruddy. And if you say something else, it's because you don't know what good looks like, including this podcast.
What are your favorite color and song of the moment?
Favorite color? I'm going to go with cobalt blue on this one. British Racing Green is also on the list. And song of the moment. Oh my goodness. I don't have a song coming to my mind right this minute. So one of the bands I've been turning to recently is Cloud Cult, and they have a number of songs that I really like. And he's singing from a place of reflecting on his own spiritual growth, and the hope of the maturation of our generation. And I appreciate that.
If you were a superhero, what superpower would you have?
Oh wow. What's coming up for me is that I had the ability to allow others to feel safe whenever. And because when we feel safe, all of a sudden a whole bunch of other possibilities open up.
Yeah. Who do you learn from? Name just one person.
So one of my mentors is a guy named Kirk Johnson, who he's a former monk, and he's written at least 5 books that I know about. And he has really helped me understand the breadth and the scope and the history of spiritual traditions, and also atheistic philosophical traditions, on how we understand maturation, how we help each other mature, and how different traditions name the phenomenon and experiences that mark our growth. He's been a big influence.
Name 2 people whom I should definitely reach out to and have this conversation with.
Well, one of the names that came up in my mind is Newton Chang, who was my colleague at Google for years. He may still be the global head of health and performance at Google. And Newton is really focusing on destigmatizing, or I would use the language, not my language, unlocking the conversation about mental health and high performance organizations and performers. And the reason it's connected to this, Yuri, is the reason we work together at Google is he's aware that doesn't happen at an individual level. It happens in community, right? The stigmatization and the support comes in community.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Jessica Grossmeyer is another colleague that I met through Google. She's independent. And she's been really focusing on unlocking conversation around health among high performers and organizations that, amongst other things, includes an acknowledgement of the importance of spiritual growth and our spiritual role, as opposed to keeping it all locked up into materialist productivity conversation, which is important, but doesn't entirely speak to what people need and long for when they're trying to function well in their field and organization.
Ask it forward. It's like pay it forward, but with questions. So ask a question a future guest will have to answer.
Let's keep it simple. What is it you aspire to create that others don't yet know you aspire to create?
And here's a question from one of the previous guests.
All right, better
What
be
is your
good.
favorite? What is your favorite cheese?
I think a really fresh, aged Parmesan is probably the pinnacle.
Is there one question that I definitely should have asked you but didn't?
Nothing comes to mind. I want to have the conversation you wanted to have, because this is your podcast and I want to be helpful, and you ask the questions that were relevant to you, and that's the best.
Charles, I have so many questions that I didn't ask, and
Yeah, well, that's your problem, Yuri.
during the whole conversation, I also had this feeling that, you know, in every question, after by answering every question, you're like opening a huge
Yeah.
amount of additional question of follow-up questions. And I had to stop myself, like, stop, stop, stop. You have so many questions to ask. You have to
Well,
ask this and this and this.
as a former filmmaker, would you like me to offer some learned wisdom about interviews?
Totally, for sure.
So I don't know if this is true for you, but this is what I was taught and I found true for me. All the real good stuff comes in the follow-up question. So when you rob yourself of the time for the follow-up question, you're also robbing yourself of all the really good stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So you asked me where I met my wife, and the answer is the Cupola del Duomo in Florence. Right. Well, there's at least 10 questions to ask there, right? Why the Duomo? Right? Has it, that kind of thing. Well, why were you at a cathedral? Of all the places you can meet your wife, is it meaningful to you that you met their wife literally on top of a cathedral? Right? Gee, I can't help noticing that neither of you lives in Florence. Can you talk more about that? Right? I don't know if those would be good answers or not, but those are all answers, right, where there's something really rich there. So when you think about formatting this, just keep that in mind. You can expect the really rich stuff to come up in the follow-up question.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Charles. And yeah, thank you very much for giving me just a small glimpse into your human part of your story. And I still have a lot of follow-up questions.
Okay, you can
And
ask.
yes,
You can
I
ask me
robbed
whenever. You have the
myself. I
time.
totally
You're the
agree
one
with
with the
you.
time limits, Yuri. That's all on you, man.
Yeah, I know. And we'll definitely have an episode number 2 and maybe 3. I don't know. So I'm inviting you there right now. I don't know when it will happen, but it will definitely happen. And yeah, thank you very much for coming here today
Well, I'm
and
delighted you invited me, Yuri.
see you in the community world.